we're proud of what we've done so far as getting this regulatory system up and running, but the truth is the full long-term impacts of regulated marijuana still really aren't known. The Denver Post had an editorial last week, I think last week or two, and the headline was, "The full story on marijuana is still being written." And that's true, and we still have a lot of work to do, and it'll be a while before we really know the long-term public health impacts, the long-term impacts on our cities, on, as Natia was talking about with the data, it's sort of hard to know really the impacts on DUIDs or school suspensions or admissions to rehab, because previously we had not been singling out marijuana-related incidents like that. So today, after yesterday talking about the nuts and bolts of what we've been doing, today we're going to move more into the impacts. So with that, first we are starting with our guests from the state. We're very fortunate to have with us Andrew Freedman from the Governor's Office and Lewis Koski from the Marijuana Enforcement Division. Andrew is the Governor's Policy and Marijuana Coordinator and Director. Andrew is a Colorado native. He graduated from Cherry Creek High School, got his JD from Tufts, got his BA from Tufts, and then his JD from Harvard. After Andrew graduated from Harvard, he worked on the governor's gubernatorial campaign, and after the campaign, he was tapped to be the chief of staff for Lieutenant Governor Garcia. Andrew worked hard with Lieutenant Governor Garcia and developed a lot of education and youth-related initiatives, and then he left to run a campaign, the Colorado
Yes on 66.
Yes on 66 campaign that was about restructuring education financing. Then in 2014, he moved over to the governor's office in this position. Then Lewis has been with the Marijuana Enforcement Division for 10 years. He is the director over there as well, and the Marijuana Enforcement Division oversees regulation and licensing of marijuana. Lewis was instrumental on, as we moved to January 1st, 2014, in kicking off this entire regulatory system. He oversees the regulation, enforcement. He's built a investigative unit and just done a lot of great stuff leading our state through this legalization of marijuana. So with that, I will turn it over to those two. Thank you.
We're actually going to speak from the podium just because there's so many people we can't see when we sit down. I hope that's okay. Morning, everybody. This is the most intimidating group I've ever spoken to. And it's not the largest group. It's none of those things that would normally be intimidating. It's actually, I have to hand it to Denver. They've put together everyone who's been involved with legalizing marijuana for the last 5 years. And this is really the brain trust right here. So I feel like most of the time I can get away with if I forget a statistic or if I gloss over some kind of nuance, like, who's going to know? But this group will know. And that's intimidating. And I do want to mention, like, this is such a resource, and for people who don't understand what's going on, first of all, nothing works without partnership. And so we have a great partnership in regulating marijuana with the city of Denver. And so I can't tell you how proud I am and how happy I am to have the relationship I do with Ashley, with Molly, and Marley, that we all get together once a month and have lunch and really moan about all of you. Honestly, nothing happens without us telling each other, and I think that's actually pretty rare between state and local governments. And so it's just been a real pleasure. But the person who makes me look really good is Lewis Koski. And so Lewis has been spending 24 hours a day for the last, 4 years now? 5 years?
5 years.
5 years.
35.
And it's killing. I mean, this guy is a real gift to Colorado. So if anybody doesn't recognize it along the way, nobody has worked harder to make this work and work in a way that protects youth, keeps it out of the hands of kids, but also protects public safety and public health. And so that's a real gift as well. But I even noticed, like, Mitch Yergert and John Scott are here from the Department of Agriculture. We couldn't do it without them. And then we get people that, former people like Allison Hasty, who helped us with all of our prevention campaigns and got us all the way to a right tone eventually. Thank you. We have Jack Reed. Where's Jack? It's on. Hello? All right. Where's Jack? Jack Reed, who doesn't like me pointing him out, but if you have any questions about any statistics whatsoever about data, you have Jack Reed around you. I'm just pointing these people out so that you know who to bother every time you get a free moment. This is the reason this is a rare moment for us. I'm going to go back to what Ashley said for a second here is we've been, as a nation, as a state, as a city, we've been so concentrated on if we should legalize marijuana. It's been a major conversation across the nation, and people get stuck in that mindset. And this is a good conversation about how you legalize marijuana. And I think you don't have to commit one way or the other of a yes or no, or you think this is a good idea or a bad idea, but we can all agree we should keep it out of the hands of kids. We all agree we should make sure that we don't get addicts. We all agree that if there's a public safety problem like banking, it should get solved. And so this is a really unique opportunity to, hey, I don't care where you stand on the debate, there's some things we need to do, and there's things we need to do it right. So a big congratulations for Denver for putting together this conversation space. I'm going to quickly run through what marijuana looks like from the governor's point of view, where we look 23 months out, and what we're looking at the future for what we care about. I'm going to hand it over to Lewis after that. I think we're going to try to keep it to under 30 minutes total of us speaking and give you guys a chance. I think we most benefit from back and forths. Most of the time I run through what legalization went through from Amendment 20 through Amendment 64, but this looks like a pretty nuanced crowd already. So what I'll say is we had a cottage industry for a long time where caregivers were growing marijuana for patients, that there was a lot of illegal, unlicensed, unregistered grows as well. That has eventually, over time, morphed into a very licensed system where we have now medical and recreational running its way through a very tight licensed system, but that doesn't mean that we still don't have the unlicensed nature of Amendment 20 and now in Amendment 64 with home grows, ways to grow outside of the unlicensed system. So we do still have a dual system. Our first demand report says up to a third of marijuana in Colorado is going through our unlicensed system and not through the licensed system. So it's something to keep in mind because I think we spend a lot of time talking about the licensed world and the unlicensed world is there. So obviously Amendment 64 passed in 2012. We spent a year putting together the kind of task force that could give us the best knowledge, information, the best priorities. All that went through the legislature. And we had a set of laws, rules, regulations. DOR had to spend about as much time as possible putting together emergency regulations, followed by permanent regulation. And on January 1st of 2014, we sold our first legitimate legal ounce of recreational marijuana. And so that was 23 months ago. So what does the governor's office see 23 months in? I'll say a few things. We see things that might be, hey, that's kind of concerning. We should keep digging into that data, but what we don't have is a public safety or public health emergency right now. And that feels, we're proud of that moment that, hey, we don't have 60% of our kids using marijuana right now. We generally have, our public health study shows that before legalized marijuana, we had roughly 20% of high schoolers saying that they'd used it in the last 30 days. After legalized marijuana, we have roughly 20% of high schoolers saying that they've used marijuana in the last 30 days. Will the numbers stay like that? I can't tell you, and it's something we're going to keep a really close eye on, but at least we're seeing that it hasn't been the end of the world for youth use, that there's a fight still worth fighting for out there. We see roughly the same thing for adult use too. Most of our public health surveys are coming back and showing that it isn't this massive new use, that in general, and Jack will forgive me for this because none of this is scientifically rigorous yet, but in general, you're seeing the same type of use patterns as you did before legalization. Everything's on an uptick, but everything was on an uptick before we legalized marijuana. And so these are heartening facts to us. There's some facts that are less heartening. Hospitalizations rose quite a bit, about doubled for emergency room visits that the people mentioned marijuana. It still accounts for less than 1% of total hospitalizations. It's still dwarfed by people showing up in the hospital because of alcohol. But a doubling is a doubling, and it's something we need to really watch. What we're doing is we're digging into that information and seeing why they're showing up in the hospital and how serious is it. And what we're finding, at least initially, is it's a lot of visitors to the state. It's a lot of edibles. And so it's something that we'll have to keep an eye on and say, okay, how is it that we can get better information to our visitors before they overdose on an edible and have a really bad trip to Colorado? No pun intended. I'm sure you guys all hate puns as much as I do. I will throw one in more during this. The other thing we're seeing that is concerning and we want to watch is DUIDs and highway fatalities. We get a little bit of a mixed message here. Colorado State Patrol has been watching DUID, and it's as they've gotten people trained up, because we didn't really do marijuana-only DUIDs a few years back, and now we've been doing it for a couple of years. And the data is not bad. It's showing, hey, there's a significant amount, but it's not as bad as alcohol. And it doesn't seem to be going up over time with any great degree. However, on the other side of that is we have seen more drivers involved in highway fatalities testing positive for THC. Quite a bit more, 44% more, and those are deaths, so that's something very serious. This isn't something that we do rigorously and standardized across the state. Coroner reports apparently are not all that standardized, so we're going to have to, again, dig into this data over time to see, do we have a new problem, or is this just us catching an old problem with better data along the way? So all of that will be, again, things that are concerning that we have to look into. And the final thing I'll say is that more kids are being suspended from school because of drug use. And we're supposing for right now, we'll have better data in the future, that's probably marijuana use. That's what we're hearing from the schools. And that's concerning. That's concerning for a lot of reasons, more than just that kids are using marijuana, but kids are missing school, and that's a big deal. So that's something that we'll have to look into over time. And then we have things that are just not running all that smoothly that we have to spend some more time tweaking. Edibles obviously continue to show up as a source of problems for us, and it's becoming a bigger part of the market. Really quick, our take on edibles is that there's 3 challenges with it. The first is dosing. We have people naturally overdosing when they're eating more than 10 milligrams. That's obviously because there's a delayed effect and because it's candy. And so they eat more than they're supposed to eat, and then 2 to 3 hours later, they're having a really bad experience. We see an accidental ingestion problem, and this is happening. This is people who are getting their hands on, and sometimes it's a hotel maid who gets their hands on food left by a visitor, and they eat it, and they have a really bad time because they just don't even know that it's marijuana, or sometimes it's children. So we watch accidental overdosing. And then the third one is probably a little bit more social. It's what kind of message are we sending to kids when gummy bears are a drug now? So that's something that we're going to continue to look into over time, is what we call the gummy bear problem. Banking obviously continues to be a big problem. If thankfully nothing violent has seemed to happen over it, although I'm not sure everything's being reported to us, but industry needs access to banking. We want to create a legitimate industry in Colorado. We've worked very hard. The MED's worked incredibly hard to make sure everything they do is legitimate, yet we're suddenly infusing a lot of cash in. And as the governor would say, it wasn't alcohol that gave rise to Al Capone, it was cash. And so we're very concerned about how much cash is in the system. It's obviously a big public safety risk. Pesticides continues to be a problem for us as well. This is one of those weird things that it just turns out that a lot of pesticide work, both regulation and enforcement, was done by the EPA and FDA, and that's not happening here for us. And so a big shout out to the Department of Agriculture, because they've had to step up in a huge way, in a way that they don't for anything else, in order to handhold the industry through pesticides. And so that's something that you'll continue to see work on over the next couple months and through the next year. And then this unlicensed market. Again, I can't tell you that people are hiding under the unlicensed market, and they're growing marijuana. A pound of marijuana sells about $2,000 in Colorado. A pound of marijuana sells about $6,000 in Minnesota. And so there's just too big of an economic incentive to grow marijuana here and ship it to another state, and so that's exactly what you're seeing. You're seeing people abuse the caregiver model, you're seeing them abuse the home grow model, you're just seeing overall confusion about how you can grow in an unlicensed way, and so people are just are trying to hide in that area and send and grow marijuana, and that will continue to be an issue for Colorado. And so that's what it looks like right now. Those are the things we're really paying attention to. Long term, I think we have a bigger question. We have a question about what commercialization does to use and what this world is going to look like as the industry matures. So we have a few questions that I think are near and dear to us. The first is, are we going to substitute marijuana for alcohol, or are we going to complement it? And what sort of public safety risks come up if we're actually complementing marijuana and alcohol together? And then we're going to really have to watch our users and see what sort of behaviors they develop over time. What's commercialization going to do to youth use? Are we going to see ads that are subliminally targeted to youth? Are we going to see people pushing into trying to get people addicted? And because again, we have similar problems in marijuana as we have as alcohol and tobacco, which is roughly 20% of the users make up 80% of the market. And so there are some economic drivers here that are worrisome from a state level that we're going to have to keep an eye on. And finally, what is normalization going to do? And just watching all those dynamics over time, that's why I think the Denver Post says this is an unwritten, the conclusion has yet to be written. Because those are 5 to 10-year questions. Those are not 2-year questions. And we're going to have to watch how the industry matures, and we're going to have a very real talk with industry about how we do this, how we don't have to go through 1960s style tobacco advertising, how we can skip to the chase and really do it right from the beginning. And so that's why we're trying to have as many conversations at the beginning as possible in order to get up and running as fast as possible. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand it over to Lewis, and I welcome your questions.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm going to give this a try from the mic I have on me. First of all, I wanted to thank the City of Denver for having us here today. It's really nice to be in front of a crowd this large and be able to talk a little bit about what we're doing. You know, and I also appreciate all the kind words that we got from Andrew. It's been really nice to have the governor's office be supportive. And under normal circumstances, I would take all the credit that you bestowed on me a few minutes ago, but sadly, I got a bunch of my team here that is actually really doing all the heavy lifting. You guys mind just standing up real quick? The folks from the MED that are here, the 5 of you, I'm going to count 2, make sure y'all stand up. If you guys, if you want to see what a brilliant team of state government employees looks like, it looks just like that. These guys do all the heavy lifting. I get to go around the state and around the nation and brag about all the work that I did, that I'm actually taking credit for what they did. So thanks again for the applause for them. They do really good work. You know, I was kind of pick up where Andrew left off. You know, there is some complexities here in the market in Colorado, and sometimes when I get an opportunity to talk about what the Marijuana Enforcement Division does, it's really important to frame where we sit within the marijuana marketplace. And certainly coming into day 2 now, everybody here has a pretty good idea that we've got this unregulated, unlicensed portion of the market that lends itself sometimes to criminal activity, but it also lends itself to law-abiding activity as well. And there's a lot of gray area in that area of the market, but there's also the commercialized market, which is the regulated businesses, the licensees, and that's really where the Marijuana Enforcement Division lives. Oftentimes we get credited with a need to do more than what we do right now outside into the unregulated market, but the reality is our jurisdiction's somewhat narrowly tailored to all of those licensees that are around the state. And so that's really what I want to talk to you about for a few minutes, because I know there's lots of questions, and so I'm going to try and make my comments as brief as possible. Having said that, the commercialized market really has 2 segments to it. The regulated businesses come from the medical component, which has been around since 2010. And then also there's the retail, which was voted in by Amendment 64 in 2012, and our first sales started in 2014. And so what we do at the core of what we do, we license and monitor businesses that have to be in compliance with the 2 statutory codes and all the regulations that exist around those 2 segments of the market. So what we do is we license the storefronts for both medical and retail businesses. We license all the cultivations, and we also license the infused product manufacturers that make the chocolates and the brownies and the sodas and those types of things. So those are the 3 main types of businesses that we license and monitor. And then there's a 4th type through the retail marijuana testing facilities, and soon the medical marijuana testing facilities will be coming online as well. I understand from yesterday there may be a question or 2 about that I'd be happy to go into a little bit more detail. So the state licenses businesses, local jurisdictions like the city of Denver, they also license all the businesses, whether they're medical or retail. And so for our businesses to be up and operational, they have to have both types of licenses. And so that in of itself kind of acts as a gatekeeping mechanism. It's also a regulatory barrier to entry into the industry. It takes a significant amount of resources and sometimes time for those licenses to happen between what the state has to do and what the local jurisdiction has to do. But that's really the core of what we do. In addition to, and I'm going to get into the rulemaking, but there's some other functions that the division has that really can take up a lot of our resources. And the first one is rulemaking. As I look across the room here, I know that there are a lot of people in the audience that have participated in our rulemaking processes. And a lot of times, our rulemaking agendas are really determined either by something like a constitutional amendment, like A64 actually told us to promulgate certain types of rules, and then the statutory rule, or the statutes that get adopted by the General Assembly also give us additional direction on what we're supposed to create rules about. Those rules cover an incredible number of professional disciplines. It's almost mind-boggling sometimes. And those issues are really divisive issues. Andrew really touched on a couple, like edibles has been a really challenging area of rulemaking. So is production management. We've got some issues that we're working through with testing and all those kinds of things. They're all very, very sometimes divisive type of issues. They're also the kind of public policy issue that doesn't have a readily apparent answer to them. You can get some of the greatest minds in rulemaking and from the industry, and sometimes we all come up to the same conclusion that these are just really hard issues to take on. So one of the approaches that we've taken as a division with one of our primary responsibilities is to create rulemaking and promulgate rules, is we've taken the approach of making sure that we get as much participation in those rulemaking processes as possible. So we started out with these really diverse work groups, and I'll talk a little bit more about those, but now we invite people in. We have a lot of informal meetings with stakeholders one-on-one. We engage people in the actual agenda setting and help kind of prioritize where our rules are going to come out of every year, because the list can be as many as 140 different rules that people are interested in wanting to make some changes to. And so the participative process is a lot like trying to get everybody that has some sort of nexus to marijuana interested and engaged in the public participative processes, so we can arrive at better policy. And we know that our partners here at the City of Denver, they've held similar rulemaking meetings. And what we really think happens when we bring that diverse group of people together to the table. One, it's kind of fun to get as many divisive opinions to the table at once. We kind of got a sick pleasure of trying to do that, and we're putting work groups together. But it actually ends up being better policy. And not only is it better policy, but it helps people understand each other a little bit better. And so I think as part of that process, for example, maybe law enforcement has a little bit better understanding of where some of the industry participants are coming from. Industry has a little bit better understanding of where the regulators are coming from. And not only does it end up in better public policy, but it also helps and assists in the implementation of that policy. So in addition to the regulatory side, I talked to you a little bit about the licensing side already, and that's when we talk about enforcement, our first line of defense on enforcement is trying to meet one of our regulatory goals. And one of our regulatory goals is to make sure that we do everything we can to prevent the criminal element from infiltrating the regulated market. And that's not necessarily an easy concept, because we started out with all these businesses that were actually operating on the medical side that were unlicensed, unregulated, and there was some potential for there to be some criminal activity already part of the industry. And so over time, we think we've really been able to move those types of characters out of the industry. And now our best protection is to ensure that they don't get licensed to begin with. And so it's kind of our gatekeeping piece, where we license businesses and all the owners, and we also license all the employees. Kind of a quick little number for you. We always have about 22,000 employees in the state of Colorado that are licensed to work occupationally within these businesses. So it's a pretty big number. In addition to all of our gatekeeping stuff, we have monitoring that we do, and I understand yesterday too there were some questions about our inventory tracking system. I'm happy to address if you still have those questions. But we do a lot of monitoring. We can monitor licensees on a daily basis from our desktops through our inventory tracking system. We can do it through on-site inspections where we actually show up and go through all of the various regulations and make sure that our licensees are in compliance. We get a lot of complaints that come in through either a hotline or a process that we have where people can fill out forms and make complaints. And then we also do real proactive things, like we put in kids who are under 21 years of age into the retail storefronts in an attempt to try and get them to purchase marijuana at those areas. So those are a big chunk, I mean, real high level type of activities that we're engaged in at the Marijuana Enforcement Division. The division itself has 4 offices around the state. We've got 73 employees that are authorized for the division, and we got a budget right around $11 million. And at this point, we're right around the 60 employees mark. We're still hiring people, so anybody out there that's interested, talk to one of my 5 friends over here at the table. They'd be happy to share with you some of the openings that we have. We also spend a lot of our time working on outreach and those types of things with the local jurisdictions. I want to talk real quick, and I'm going to wrap it up here, just give you guys an idea, especially if you're from outside of the state of Colorado, what really the size of the marketplace looks like on the regulated side. So in the state of Colorado, we've had 322 jurisdictions within the state that have reported to us what their stance is on commercialized marijuana in their jurisdictions. The number stands right at 100 out of the 322 that have done they either have medical marijuana only, retail marijuana only, or a combination of the two where they license businesses and storefronts. Statewide then, we have 2,500 total licensed business or licensed premises around the state, and most of those, probably right around half of them or better, are right here in the city of Colorado. 2/3 of them exist on the I-25 corridor between Fort Collins and Pueblo, and then about 12% or so of our licensees are out on the western slope. The other thing too is sales. Everybody, one tool that we have that I've mentioned already is our inventory tracking system. Our inventory tracking system gives us an incredible amount of information. In fact, we have no idea really what kind of data is in there that we could mine to learn more about what's happening in the industry. But from a really high level, it's always kind of interesting to know out of all those licensed premises we have that there's always right around about 575,000 to 600,000 plants that have been reported into our inventory tracking system. And we've really had some interesting sales trends that have occurred over the last couple of years of us tracking that data, not the least of which was the amount of flowering marijuana that's sold versus the amount of edibles that are sold. So for example, I think everybody expected with there being about 100,000 patients on the registry here in the state of Colorado, that when retail marijuana came along, that medical marijuana would probably just fade away and ultimately it would just be this retail market. Well, the reality is even up until here recently, flowering marijuana on the medical side outpaces sales of flowering marijuana on the retail side. Now, what's interesting, that flip that I think, and this kind of plays into what Andrew was talking about with the difficulty around edibles, is edible products, units of edibles on the retail side outsell medical edibles almost 2-to-1. So when you look at, we have about 3.58 or 3.5 million edibles that have been sold so far this calendar year in the state of Colorado from licensed premises. The retail one is nearly double, a little bit better than double what we have on edibles. Just one quick closing thought before Andrew and I start taking questions. I get a lot of opportunities like this to speak in front of groups, and a lot of times it's folks from outside of the state of Colorado that are contemplating some sort of marijuana policy similar to this. And I always get asked, what advice do you have for us? What can you do to help policymakers make better decisions? And I think if you reflect back on what you've done yesterday and what you're going to do today, everything you need to know to be successful is kind of laid right out here in front of you over the last couple of days. And a lot of it has to do with being able to build really strong partnerships. And it's not necessarily building the strong partnerships with the people that you're most comfortable with. It's being able to build strong partnerships with people maybe you even disagree with. And I think if you look around the table here, that's kind of where we started a couple years ago with a lot of disagreement, a lot of divisive ideas on how this should all play out. The only reason I think we've been as successful as we have been in implementing this, recognizing that there are still social issues that we need to address, but in the implementation of this, I think we've been really successful, and it has everything to do with partnering with people and incorporating a diverse set of viewpoints into the policy that actually gets developed. And so I'll leave it at that, and really look forward to any questions that you guys might have.
So Andrew, you talked about the concerns, but I want to hear what are some of the benefits the governor's office, I mean, you've talked about the negative a little bit, about what you're seeing. What are the positive things that are happening?
So I think first to talk about maybe the promise of Amendment 64 would be that you would see the same sort of use, but you would see it in a regulated, safe manner. And I think some of that you're seeing right now. So every dollar that goes into a recreational sale at this point, I mean, maybe 90 cents on the dollar, is being taken directly out of the black market. And so that's a place, you know, the black market doesn't care if they sell to somebody under 21. The black market doesn't care if there's mold on the product, unless you have, I guess, a really good dealer who cares about you. But in general, market dynamics don't go that way. Pesticides is a great example too, right? As we're getting up and running more and more on pesticides, this is a safer this will be a more and more safe and reliable product that won't be harming people as much. So I think there's a promise behind Amendment 64 and Amendment 20 that can be realized over time. That if we continue not to see huge spikes in youth use and the like, and maybe even a decline over time as we really do move away from an unlicensed and black market into a more regulated market, you could actually see those numbers moving in a positive direction. And the other part, and I downplay this a lot just because I think the perception I have is that people come to me thinking that this is the end-all be-all. Tax revenue, we are projecting somewhere around $90 million this year in tax revenue in our fiscal year, which to some people sounds like a lot of money, and it's not a trivial amount of money. About 40% of it goes directly back into different parts of regulation. So you're left with somewhere between $40 and $50 million of money that we spend on school construction, on youth prevention programs, on addiction treatment programs for all sorts of drugs and alcohol. But it's a $27 billion budget this year. And so I do try to put people into perspective that if you're looking to shore up your education system with marijuana money, you're just not going to get there. So I come at it sounding a little negative. I think it's not trivial money, but that's only because people's perception is like, hey, let's have full-day kindergarten and pay for every kid to go to college from marijuana money, and that's not going to happen. And the other part of it is jobs. Currently, how many licensees or occupational licenses have we put out so far?
There's always active about 22,000. 22,000,
that's not a small number. And a lot of these people are people who don't have high school degrees and are in jobs that otherwise they might not be employed. And so those are very real, very positive numbers.
Good morning. My name is Danica Lee. I'm with the Denver Department of Environmental Health, and I was wondering if one of you could maybe give us an idea of what the status is of pesticide residue testing and getting that online for the labs in Colorado.
So for those that pesticides have run my life for the last 3 months, 4 months, 8 months. For those unfamiliar with the problem, Department of Agriculture normally works in a pretty welcoming partnership with both the USDA, the EPA, the FDA on what should be used and not used. Those people are pretty silent on what's going on right now. They've just the EPA's just given a path forward for how to get marijuana specifically onto a label for pesticide use, but it's going to take a while to get that up and running. And enforcement of it has been a bit of a challenge. And so what you're going to see over the next, hopefully as soon as possible, but I would say easily over the next month, is the vision that comes out of Department of Public Health, Department of Revenue, and Department of Agriculture about what our vision of what pesticides looks like from the 10,000 foot level and how we're going to enforce it. And I think once we have that moment, we're off to the races for certifying labs. And so the problem has been that we haven't had that full vision yet, but I think we're there now. And a few I's to be dotted, a few T's to be crossed, and then we're going to be working on certifying labs. Anything to add to that?
Hi, John O'Connor from Australia. First, I'd like to thank Colorado as well, because government there has just signed off medical marijuana and hope to sell its first licensed product next year. And more importantly, their first poll, only 7% of people disagreed with the concept. So I think there's a lot of good work here that's happened. So thanks for that. Two questions. From a government perspective, what do you hope to be on the report card in 23 months' time that's not there today? And Andrew, did you really learn to surf in Australia?
Where did you pick up that one? To learn to surf in Australia?
The internet.
Do you want to handle the first question?
Just to make sure I understand the question, what's on the agenda for us to work on policy making in the next 24 months?
Yeah, maybe he's not there today.
Yeah, well, I think probably for us in the next 12 to 24 months, from the Marijuana Enforcement Division's perspective, is implementing some of the regulations that we just passed. In advance of today, we had regulations, for example, on edibles that required that our licensees score and stamp edible products to show where the various servings are within a product. Part of that came from some of the concerns we had that Andrew addressed already about edibles being not necessarily intuitive to a new consumer to be able to understand how much they're taking in. Those rules are actually already implemented. What we did is we added a bunch onto those. So we have a new rule that goes into effect November 30th that we're giving them a year to come into compliance with on the manufacturer side, where they actually have to now stamp a universal symbol onto each one of those serving sizes. We've also passed a regulation that requires that if you can't stamp or mark it, then the product has to be 10 milligrams or less. So for example, all liquids now going forward, probably in the next 6 to 12 months, will have to be in 10 milligram servings, and then there'll be some labeling and packaging restrictions that go along with those. So that's probably one of our bigger things. We also made some changes to our production management rule, and some of those are going to be coming into place. One, not the least of which is where we're only going to allow one retail license per licensed premises. And right now we're working on an analysis of that to make sure that we can have a real seamless transition into that new kind of policy. And then, you know, this public policy is so dynamic still that we also anticipate that there's some potential changes coming our way. There's a lot of rumors out there about legislation already, and those will probably to a large extent drive how we engage in rulemaking coming into next spring.
We have maybe 3 large conversations. So first of all, I think we're looking for stabilization right now, and we're not looking to recreate all that often. And so I think what you're going to see is a lot more tweaks. That being said, I think we have 3 big conversations ahead of us. The first one is on commercial consumption. I saw Jordan Wellington here from Vicente Cedarburg, and they've been working on this for quite a while, but it's obviously a conversation that's been happening on the Denver side of who should be able to have marijuana in a commercial enterprise of any sort. And I think that's now a conversation that the state needs to have as well in order to figure out how to make it safe and healthy and keep it out of the hands of kids still and have the same mission. The second is, again, like I said at the end, how does commercialization work in Colorado? And I think we're going to see it pop up 1,000 different ways. And so we're going to have to continue to regulate around commercialization to make sure we're not harming the public. And the last is, as I'm harping on a little bit, is we still have to have a conversation of how licensees and unlicensed markets interact, because I think we're just seeing too many bad things happen in the unlicensed market. And I learned to surf. I never learned to surf, but I stood up for 1 second in Byron Bay, and there was all these dolphins around me. It was really magical. So thank you for asking.
Good morning. So I work with families and youth in marijuana education and prevention, and I get a lot of questions about synthetic marijuana. So I'm wondering what trends we've seen with synthetic marijuana and what we are doing about them.
So Jack will give me a head nod if I'm right here, but I think we have seen a good drop in synthetic marijuana overdosing and hospitalizations in it. He's giving me a grimace, but I still think that's correct. That it's been less of a problem than it was previously, although still a problem. It is a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but that's what the data I've read so far on it.
Hi, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate all the information. Kevin Mamology with the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Recently, Colorado's agricultural commissioner stated that the biggest obstacle to implementing pesticide regulations in the state was the marijuana industry. Could you guys elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I don't know the specific quote that he's referring to, but here's what his conversations with me are. This is, so most of the time when you get a new crop in the world, it's a farmer who has already been growing 200 acres of corn already, and now they're going to try a new kind of millet. And so the new kind of millet doesn't have anything that's specifically for it, but the farmer's already very used to reading the label, knows exactly how to administer pesticides, but basically probably has somebody who's already got a master's degree in this stuff working on it. I think what the commissioner is finding is that a lot of people aren't used to this sort of work in the marijuana industry because they haven't been asked to do it so far. And so I think there's a culture of how do we catch people up as quickly as possible so that they understand how to do pesticide, how to read the label, how to make sure that they're applying it correctly. In that vein, they've had compliance assistance meetings, hundreds of them, across the state, and trying to get people up and running as fast as possible on that.
Right. But the reason I bring it up is because we've had states like Nevada recently. They held back a bunch of product as soon as they opened up their medical marijuana facilities, and so it's just odd that we've had the opportunity to implement some type of testing for pesticides and harmful chemicals, and then we have these other states that just came online and they're already executing.
Sometimes it's good
enough
enough to be the first, right?
Oh, I guess so.
Good morning, and thanks for the information. My name is Marty Otanez. I'm a professor in the anthropology department at UC Denver, just 1,000 meters away. And I'm actually at the very early phase of talking to the university for a medium-term goal of a testing lab. So in that context, I have a couple questions. Could you expand on, regarding the MED, is mandatory testing required at the moment for flowers, and is mandatory testing required for edibles? That's one dual question. And the other question is, could you expand on the issue of industry, of companies voluntarily picking the samples that are actually tested? And thanks in advance for your responses.
Thanks. So I'll just give you guys the quick overview of our testing program because I think it answers your first question. As it stands right now in statute, the state legislature directed us to promulgate regulations for mandatory testing, and it gave us the ability to do it on our own timeline. That was a welcome statute because everything else that we've had during the entirety of this process has been on some sort of unrealistic deadline, 6 months to get the first book of marijuana regulations written and be able to get people licensed in a short period of time. So it was really nice when it came to the testing part that we could actually really do this in a really thoughtful and predictable way. So as it stands right now and through the implementation of the regulations that we created, we have 4 types of tests really. We have tests for potency. That is, there's tests required for potency on both flower and edibles and concentrates. We also have testing for homogeneity, which is a hard word to say in front of 250 people. but that's really specific to edibles, and so what we really want to do is make sure that that the THC, the active THC that's part of the edible, isn't in one bite of it, because then it defeats the purpose of all the other regulations that we have. So we want to make sure that the psychoactive component is spread evenly through that. So those are the two big ones, and homogeneity, like I said, is really unique to mostly to edible. So then on the other side of it, we have contaminant testing, and within contaminant testing, we've implemented two portions of that. That's for residual solvents. So if the licensees are using some sort of solvent-based process to extract the THC into concentrate, they have to test it to make sure that it's not above certain levels. And then also the fourth one is microbial testing. Right now, as we speak today, we're in the beta testing process for microbial testing, where our licensees are submitting test batches. So to answer your question a lot shorter, yes, there is mandatory testing, and it's well underway. We really anticipate that one of our next steps on that is going to be pesticide testing, and there'll be a requirement for licensees to do that. Now, with the sampling piece, voluntary, at this point in time, let me back up. Originally, in one of our rules, we were going to require that licensees used a sampling company that was approved by the state. Well, for some of this testing to work, you have to have enough people willing to take those samples and to do it well. Otherwise, if your testing protocols require all these numbers of test batches be submitted, you have to have the group on the ground. So ultimately what we did is we decided that we were going to put it on our licensee to do their own sampling. We're actually working right now with the Colorado Department of Health and Environment and a couple other stakeholders, in particular the testing facilities, to really dial in what the best practices are for that, and how you collect them without contaminating the sample or ruining it by the time it gets to the testing facility. And then the concern obviously there would be that, well, then a licensee can pick whatever they want to pick and test what they want to test, right? And that's not too far from being inaccurate. However, another component of our testing program that's still being developed that needs a little bit more time is random testing. And one of the things that we've contemplated is utilizing our inventory tracking system to be able to randomly hold batches of product, whether it's concentrate or flour or edibles, and hold it until such time as it's tested for whatever we determine that they have to test. So as we continue to roll out this process, which has been a very long process, but I think we've done a really good job as we've implemented it, those are some of the next steps that we see coming down the road.
Hello, I'm Eugene with CHEX, stands for Cannabis Hemp Exchange. We're a B2B wholesale cannabis exchange software for licensees. This is a data API question. Can you speak to your interest level to having software companies like ours, as well as inventory management software companies, feeding Metric with data about inventory levels and wholesale activity, as well as technical capability? It's been hard to understand whether we can integrate with Metric. A lot of companies say that it's not possible, but one told me that they cracked the code and they're doing it, so maybe you can clarify that.
Sure. So for others in the room like myself who are not technically minded, an API is we've been referring to as an app-to-app interface, and that allows, for example, point-of-sale companies that are doing the day-to-day or the transaction-by-transaction work at the storefronts are outside in separate systems from our inventory system that we call Metric that tracks basically marijuana from seed to sale. And what we've done, kind of get to the point of your question, is we have worked with our software vendor. There is an app-to-app interface that's been developed. And as we stand right now, we are beta testing. So that might have been the company that cracked the code. They got invited to beta testing. I don't know that for sure. I hope so. So the beta testing's ongoing right now. We've got our first phase of it done, and we're working with a bunch of companies on the point of sale side so they can be able to transact as a sale occurs at the storefront. It updates metric. As something comes into metric, it updates the point of sale. Our next step in that process is to do something really similar on the cultivation side, where we only have marijuana getting thrown over the wall to the metric system. And the other thing that I think is really important to understand, and I see somebody clapping in the front, I appreciate the applause, it's very nice. So the next step in this process, because again, I talked about the nice part of getting stakeholders together, diverse opinions, all those things. It's really easy to get up in front of a group and say that. It's another altogether thing to get everybody together. And what we're doing is we're forming a user group that we anticipate that our vendor is going to be involved with, all of our licensees that want to be involved with, a lot of the third-party vendors like yourself are going to be welcome to the table. We're not necessarily putting a limit on who can participate in that process, but what we really want to do is work on how we continue to develop the inventory tracking system and take it to the next level. The inventory tracking system in of itself is one of those deadlines that we were giving early on, so I think everybody needs to understand that we got it up, it's running, it's doing what it was really intended to do, which is to help us be able to monitor licensees. And so as we continue to look at ways to develop that, we're going to incorporate more and more stakeholders, types of businesses, all to the table to help us figure out what's going to be the best way to do all that.
Good morning. Ethan Borg. I'm a local owner and operator here in the city of Denver. Testing is a big issue for us. We want to provide the cleanest possible product to our consumers. One of the big questions we have, though, is getting a reference lab to standardize the testing among the testing facilities. We've got 6 now online to do the microbial testing. I'd like to know how that microbial beta testing is going, how long that might be going and prior to being mandatory, and where we're going with getting a state-sanctioned reference lab to actually check on the testing facilities themselves. Thank you.
All right, so during the last legislative session, the General Assembly directed the Colorado Department of Health and Environment to establish a reference laboratory, or a reference library, not a reference laboratory. The concept behind the reference library is it's a place where, without giving up a lot of their proprietary information, testing facilities can report on some of the best practices that they've instilled and the CDPHE is used to help certify some of those testing facilities. In addition to that, CDPHE has already held a number of work groups, and I know that because we've participated on them, that is looking at ways for us to be able to cross-validate testing amongst all the testing facilities. And so I don't know that it'll, in fact, at this point I kind of doubt that it'll start out as a actual reference laboratory concept. I do think it will start out in the form of a round robin type of scenario where we may be purchasing marijuana as the MED, taking it to one of the testing facilities to prepare it for test samples, and then those test samples will go out to all the testing facilities, and then we'll statistically, I say that like I'm the one that's going to do it, statistically analyze all those results to make sure that everyone's falling in within a certain standard deviation of the norm for all the testing. And so that's how we kind of anticipate that rolling out. Like everything else that we do, we also anticipate that that's going to require some additional development, and as we get some of those results in, we think we're going to learn from those processes and be able to turn the lights on and turn them off again, and then come up with some really good policy at the end.
Hi, Devin Granberry with the City of Sheridan. First off, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today. Appreciate it. You mentioned earlier some rumors you've heard about what might be coming out of the state legislature, and I don't want to be a rumor monger, but is there anything that we ought to be keeping our eye on when the legislature gets to business here shortly?
Yeah, I think commercial consumption is probably going to be a conversation for everybody, and that's right now it's different from city to city, and I know that Colorado Springs has some medical marijuana pot clubs. In Denver, there was an effort to put on the Denver ballot, allowing for it in most commercial establishments as long as they set a number of rules, including keeping anybody out of the age of 21, and there was a number of things. there's a bill currently being drafted that will try to codify some of that. I think there's an eagerness amongst a lot of people to have a bigger conversation of what about commercial consumption should look like, and I think that has to involve the cities and counties in order to really determine that. You know, I would like if everybody comes to the table starting to talk about commercialization, and I'm just going to harp on that a lot, because how do you want marijuana advertised in the state of Colorado? It's going to be a big issue in the next 10 years. It's not quite yet, but it'll get there. And so I think the more we have these conversations now, the more we can be on the front end of it. You got one more.
I too am from Australia. I'm just here as an observer. But has there been any significant change in the jail population since all the legalisation business came in?
I don't know if I can answer the jail population. I can say that there was, in fact, and I think what you would expect, a dramatic drop in citations for marijuana overall. Marijuana citations for use, for distribution, so a lot fewer people found themselves even in any sort of trouble with the law on those things. What I'll say is we're watching those statistics closely because there was an incremental uptick the year after it dropped dramatically. And so we want to make sure that, I think again, one of the promises of Amendment 64 was that we were not using this to police different populations differently, and so we're all keeping an eye on that information as it comes in.
Well, but you could put some savings on the jail side into the equation of how much you make.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really good question about 5 years out, which is what's the cost to society? I think it's too soon right now. I just don't think we should come in and do those sorts of things, because I think they will be wildly, and I think I could see two different groups coming up with wildly different numbers, but I think that stuff will start to stabilize in 5-6 years, and we'll be able to do those sorts of studies.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's our time.